DND number 2, Suffer the Children in Jesus' Name, Chapter 3. May, 15 years later, New York City. Karen stepped with a smile as her regular morning customers sauntered through the door. "Morning, y'all," she called. "Morning, y'all," Irene mocked. "Carol, sweetheart, if you use that cute little southern accent just the right way, it could help you go far here in New York." "Don't you go listening to her now," Rosie whispered before she turned to Irene. "Our little Carol doesn't need to use her accent or anything else. She already has every guy she meets eating out of her hands." Carol laughed, arms akimbo. "Do you think that could be because I'm a waitress? Funny. But really, kiddo, listen. Men here love that stuff," Irene said as she dumped her bag in the empty booth where her two friends, Alice and Rosie, had already dropped their stuff. She joined them at the counter. "All you have to do is come with me tonight, and you'll come home with a grand, easy." Tapping her chin, Carol pretended to seriously consider Irene's offer. I've always wondered what it would be like to be a lady of the evening, but I think not." "Suit yourself," Irene said with a shrug. "Carol has no need to pick up our profession, do you now, sweetie?" Rosie said, making her Irish accent more pronounced. She smiled at Carol as she watched her pour each woman a cup of fresh hot coffee, provide them with cream and sugar, and call in their usual order. "So, how'd your audition go? Did you hear anything yet?" Rosie asked. Carol turned with a smile. "Rosie, you are so sweet to ask." "Oh, yeah," Irene agreed sarcastically. "She's so sweet. Why, I don't even need sugar. I could just dip her finger in my coffee." Carol grinned. "The final cut is not until Thursday." That was yesterday, wasn't it?" Rosie asked. "Or is it tomorrow? Oh, sakes alive, I've forgotten what day it is again." She put her hand to her forehead. "I think I'm in the first stages of Alzheimer's." "Today is Friday, sweetie, and final cut is next Thursday," Carol clarified. "And until then, I have to go straight from here to rehearsal every day. It's nerve-wracking. Y'all keep your fingers crossed for me." "Aye, we will," Rosie promised, patting Carol's hand. "I've got a good feeling about this one, Carol girl. I'm thinking it's the lead for you." "Well, I hope you're right, because I really need the work right now. I'm running short this month." "Did you have to send money to Atlanta again?" Irene asked. "Yeah, Mom's gotten worse. They've started her on some different medications, and I had to pay for part of it." Irene shook her head. "I don't know why you keep sending your hard-earned money down there anyway. What'd she ever do for you?" Carol had to think about that, and shrugging, she finally said, "She brought me into the world." "Get real, Caro," the usually quiet Alice spoke up. "Anyone can do that. Getting pregnant and giving birth is no big deal." "Oh, leave the poor wee girl alone," Rosie ordered. Carol smiled as she served them. They were a crazy bunch, a great bunch. She really liked them, but she worried about them too. They'd all fallen, one way or another, into a questionable and dangerous profession. Carol should be the one looking out for them, yet they were always asking after her welfare. She looked them over. Short, stout Rosie, her black hair cut to chin length, had startling green eyes and was the eldest of the three. A seasoned veteran, she'd been in the business since she ran away from home as a teen when her parents had first moved here from Ireland. Even though she never quite found a way to remove herself from her situation, she was always looking for ways to save the souls of the working girls she came in contact with. Rosie had been responsible for getting Alice enrolled in college. A trim girl with bright red hair and chocolate brown skin, Alice would one day be involved in the juvenile defense system. If she survives, Carol thought. Tall, bottle blonde Irene, on the other hand, was saving for her dream. She hoped to buy a small hair salon in a small town in upstate New York, where Caroline suspected she was from. Working as a trio, they made good money and watched out for each other. They had a way of making their lifestyle seem quite attractive if one could get past the actual deed. They'd arrived at the tiny diner almost every morning for breakfast before they went home to sleep, and had come to know Carol well enough to care about her. Are you still teaching ballet on Saturdays? Alice asked, snapping Carol out of her daydream. Doesn't that bring in some extra money? Yes, but that one class doesn't pay enough to help much. I'm going to talk to Madam and see if I can pick up another class sometime during the week. I thought you take classes yourself from Madam during the week. I do, but I could still teach 2 days plus Saturdays. I'll tell you though, if I don't fix my budget soon, I'm going to have to drop my own classes and take on another job that pays. Well, we can't let that happen, honey, Rosie soothed. You're going to make it big one day. Don't give up. Oh, please. I'll be 27 this year. I'm past my prime. I tried, but I didn't make it. At least I can say I tried. It's okay, you know. I've been in some big shows, and I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. Right now, I'm just grateful for any chance I get to do what I love, and that's dance. She twirled and bowed, and they applauded. Thank you, thank you. She blew a kiss. Well, they just let anybody in here. Carol jerked around at the familiar, tinny, greasy sound of the voice. George Mancini, a sleazeball in every way, unfortunately was also her landlord. What do you want? She demanded. I came for breakfast, he stated, his eyes roaming over her as he slid into a booth. Yeah, right. At 6 in the morning? You got a problem with that? So order then, she snapped, not bothering to answer his question. She stood silently, waiting for him to place his order, but he snatched the pad out of her hand. First things first, Caro. You must have forgotten to put your rent money in the lockbox on the way out this morning, like you promised. So I figured I'd do you a favor and come over here and collect it myself. She lost some of her aplomb. I just needed to work a few more days to get it all together. I'll pay you after work tomorrow. You'll pay me now, or you won't have a place tomorrow. Okay, I'll pay you when I get off today. She made the promise, having no idea how she would accomplish it. Sorry, babe, no can do. I can't think of a reason I should give you special treatment over the other tenants. He looked her over and rubbed a finger down her arm. Maybe you can think of something. I'm open to all kinds of suggestions. Carol jerked her arm out of reach. I suggest you get out of here before Eugene comes out. I said I'd pay you today. Now get. She turned quickly, hoping to make a hasty retreat, but she wasn't fast enough, and George sprang up, grabbing Carol by the arm. Rosie ran for the kitchen, intent on bringing Eugene into the equation. Eugene, the owner of Eugene's Diner, could have been the model for the Mr. Clean character. A retired Navy cook. He would make short work of this guy. George yanked on Carol's arm, bringing her flush with his body, and stuck his hand inside her apron pocket and snatched the wad of money she habitually carried with her for safekeeping. Irene jumped on him, pounding on his back, but he flung her off and stood back to count the money. You're 100 short. I said I'd bring it to you later, she snapped, trying to keep her voice steady while rubbing her arm where he'd grabbed it. What's going on here? Eugene demanded, emerging from the kitchen and glowering at George. George glanced at the big man and began backing toward the entrance. Losing some courage, he nodded at Caro. I'll go ahead and give you until this time tomorrow. If you don't get it to me by then, you're out. Eugene advanced, but George made a quick exit. Caro sank down onto a bar stool, her hand shaking, and Eugene put a beefy hand on Caro's shoulder. Did he hurt you? She shook her head. No, I just need a minute. You want I should take him out? Eugene asked. Caro looked up to make sure he was just teasing. I appreciate the sentiment, Eugene, but no. She shook her head. I don't know why I let him bother me. He's a jerk, and I've brushed off plenty of those in my time. He thinks if he puts the squeeze on you, you'll give in, Irene said. Well, that shows how stupid he is, Rosie said. She turned, sniffing the air. You smell something burning? Oh, no. Eugene ran toward the kitchen. Take all the time you need, little girl, he called to Caro. She sighed. I don't know what I'm going to do. Get a new apartment. That's what I'd do, Irene offered. Caro shook her head. You know how hard it is to find a place in New York, and even if I could find a place, they'd want a deposit and first month's rent. If I can't come up with a measly $100, how can I afford to move? No, I may as well pack up and go back to Atlanta, she said, sniffing back the tears that threatened. Though I don't have any assets there either. Irene put a hand on her back. Come with us tonight, Caro. You know, the People's Music Awards are in town, and we're going to work the hotel. Maybe I was kidding around earlier, but really, you would make a killing. It's not as hard as you think, you know what I mean? You get used to it after a while. Carol looked up into Irene's eyes. As ludicrous as the offer was to Caroline, she knew Irene was sincere. Carol shook her head. I can't. I'm sorry, but I just can't. Look, Rosie said, we can pull together. Whatever we make tonight, we'll get enough for you. Well, that's very kind, really, but if I can't do what you do to make your money, then I can't very well let you do it for me and then take the money from you. Does that make sense? It does, Alice said, but I think I have the answer. You come to the hotel anyway. My cousin's husband is the manager and sometimes bartender in the hotel lounge. He could use an extra waitress tonight. I know because he asked me if I wanted to help out. She grinned. I told him it sounded too much like work to me. Anyway, they're going to be slammed. Come on down, Carol. You'll make probably 200-300 easy. Carol nodded. She certainly didn't mind working hard for her money. It sounds too good to be true, but I'll give it a try. My daddy always said it never hurts to try. You're right. Right before he walked out, Irene mumbled as Rosie elbowed her. New scene. Are you sure I look all right? Carol asked for the third time as they entered the plush surroundings of the Grand Marquis Hotel. She eyed the place, awed by the glitz. The doorways and stairways and elevators were all trimmed in gold. Large lounge sofas were opulent in black and gold velvet, surrounded by massive vases filled with fresh flowers. A giant crystal chandelier suspended from the cathedral ceiling made the gold surrounding the front desk sparkle like glitter. There were several shops right there in the lobby, including a jeweler, a dress boutique, a drugstore, and the lounge where Carol would be working tonight. Carol, will you stop worrying about how you look? Irene answered. And that black skirt and those dancer's legs, girl, you just don't know. Trust me, doll, you look great. She reached for Carol's collar. Here, let me fix something, though. She unfastened the first 2 buttons of Carol's white blouse. Carol gaped at her, and Irene shrugged. What? A little cleavage never hurt. Now, just work it a little, bend over low to place a glass on a table. You'll be surprised how that can raise your tip percentage. Carol only shook her head and buttoned her blouse. Hey, Maurice, Alice called as they approached the bar. Maurice came to greet them and to meet the new waitress that Alice had promised him. He looked Carol over. Man, oh man, Alice. When you deliver, you really deliver. Alice primped her hair. Yeah, so I've been told. The statement caused a burst of laughter and lewd comments from Irene and Rosie. And Maurice frowned. Now, let's be discreet tonight, ladies. This is a class joint, and the wife's pregnant, and I can't afford to lose my job. Alice kissed his cheek. Don't you worry about a thing. You just keep looking the other way. Maurice sent the others on their way and took Carol's arm to show her around, find her an apron and name tag, and throw her out in the deep end. He was surprised and pleased it only took 30 minutes for Carol to become his best waitress. No slacker here. She worked hard, moved fast, made nice with the lady customers, and made friends with the men. She was great. Definitely different from his other girls. It must be that southern hospitality thing she had going on, he decided. She smiled and chatted with each customer. She hadn't developed the harsh edge that comes from New York living. She worked nonstop for several hours without a break, and when business slowed, Maurice finally called her over, told her to take 30 minutes. She nodded gratefully, grabbed a soda, slipped into the back room, and sank down into a chair. Curiously, she pulled out her wad of bills and counted. $439, and there were still a few hours left to work. Forget a break. She would take complete advantage of this opportunity. Gulping her drink, she rushed back out to the waiting crowd. Whoa, Maurice said as Carol passed him. I thought I gave you a break. You did, but I decided I don't want to miss out on a minute. I hope that's okay. He shrugged. Have at it. Maurice smiled as he threw ice in a blender and lined glasses up on the bar. This girl is something else, he thought. She has the energy of a child. She only takes a few minutes to rest, and she's right back out there, going strong as ever. She's an expert at keeping everyone happy. It's like this is a giant party, and she's the perfect hostess. No one seems angry because of the large crowd or the wait on food. She's got everyone smiling, maybe because she's smiling so prettily herself. Truth be told, Carol was having a blast. The crowd was such a jovial lot, she couldn't help but have fun. She laughed with a group of women who were eyeing the table of men across from them and making outlandishly lewd comments that Carol was sure they would never have made had they not had several drinks already. The women were begging her to play matchmaker when one of the men from the table in question called her. "Carol?" She whirled around, smiled. "Yes, sir. What can I get for you?" She was looking at a handsome face with gorgeous, dark, cobalt blue eyes. His dark hair curled just above his collar like someone who hadn't been to the barber in some time. He wore a black silk shirt with black slacks. A black Stetson lay in the seat beside him. There were others at the table with him, and she figured them to be part of someone's band. She'd been surrounded by musicians all night from the People's Music Awards that would air live the next evening. The hotel was supposedly full of celebrities, but she was only concerned with one thing, her rent. "Sir," she asked again, "did you need another drink?" One of his friends smacked him in the back of the head. "The lady's talking to you, Nash." He cleared his throat. Sorry. It's just that, well, I noticed your name tag. I used to know a Caro. You look a lot like her." She smiled at him. Oh, man. It has to be her, he thought. "Could be. Are you from Georgia?" she asked. Georgia. It is her. It would be too much of a coincidence to meet another Caro from Georgia who looked so much like the girl he remembered. Though this girl isn't a skinny little kid anymore. Lord, she's beautiful. Her blonde hair is much thicker and healthier and, well, she definitely isn't the little girl he remembered. And even though she could still be considered slim, she'd filled out in all the right places. "Sir, are you from Georgia?" Carol asked, wondering if the man had a hearing disability. "No." She smiled again. "Then it probably wasn't me. Can I get anything for you?" She balanced a tray on the edge of the table and bent to clear the glasses. Regardless of what Irene had advised, the view she gave them all was completely unintentional. "Thank you, dear Jesus," mumbled one of the men from across the table. "I don't think Jesus has anything to do with that," another guy answered. The man who'd originally addressed her glared at his two friends, which shut them up immediately. He turned back to Caro. "I'm from Tennessee," he said softly. She stilled. "And the Caro I knew, I called her Princess Caroline." The glasses crashed to the floor. "Yep, it's you," he muttered, as he knelt down to where she'd sunk to the floor. He took her hands, stilling them from trying to clean the mess, and pulled her up. "Toby?" she asked. He nodded. "Toby Smith?" "Yes, Caroline, it's me." She stood frozen as dozens of questions and emotions began churning inside of her. The feelings all came back in a rush. Every emotion she'd experienced all those years ago bobbed to the surface, one by one like the remnants of a shipwreck. Fear, sorrow, hopelessness, hatred, loneliness, desolation, pain, embarrassment, longing. So much longing, and so much pain and heartache. She stepped back and couldn't breathe. I can't believe I never thought I'd... She put a shaky hand to her mouth. Placing a finger under her chin, he tilted her face up and smiled. "Me too." She pulled away, running a hand over her hair as if she had an urgent need to appear presentable. I have to go." She ran. Toby watched her go. "Wow, Nash, what'd you say to her?" Toby grabbed his friend by the lapels. "Jeff, be a good buddy and take care of the bill. I'll see you guys later." He grabbed his hat and tossed it to Jeff. "And hold on to that," he called over his shoulder as he ran after Caroline. He'd been standing out in the carpeted corridor waiting for her to come out of the ladies' restroom. Accosted by autograph seekers several times, he was beginning to worry that she'd slipped out without him noticing. But it was just a moment later that the door opened and she stepped out. Caroline. Her head snapped up, and she was reminded of that time so long ago when he'd startled her coming out of the bathroom at his home. "Come here." It wasn't an order, more like a plea, and she moved toward him where he stood by a window, smoothing her hair as she approached. Standing before him, she peered up into his face. "Does seeing me again make you so unhappy?" he asked gently. No, it's not that. I just felt so, I mean, I was just so overwhelmed. Well, me too, Caroline. Seeing you again blows me away. She twisted her hands together as she spoke. I'm sorry I ran away like that. I thought I was going to be sick. I just needed to get myself under control. I was coming back, really. I'm surprised you followed me. He reached out, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. Let me see if I can explain why I followed you. Since the moment you left my house that cold January day, my life changed. I was sick over you. I missed you. I worried about you. I couldn't get you out of my mind. Caroline, I thought about you almost every day for the last, 15 years? And now I run into you here. I mean, it's like the freaking Twilight Zone. So when you took off, I followed. There is no way I was letting you slip away again. I would have waited all night if that's what it took. He smiled at her. And now, here you are, standing right in front of me. Unbelievable. Just look at you. You've grown into a beautiful woman, Caroline. She looked down immediately. Oh, please, Toby, don't say such things. Why not? It's true. And how about me? Do you think I've changed much? You have. You're so tall, but now that I know who you are, your face seems just the same. I don't know why I didn't recognize you right away. Toby? Toby Nash? Look, it's Toby Nash! A group of women converged on them, literally pushing Caroline aside to get closer to Toby. He quickly signed his name on everything they shoved at him. All charm, he spoke to them as if they were all that existed for him in the world. Caroline stood alone, watching. He was even taller now, like his father, and big. His athletic build contrasted with the softness of his eyes and the long, dark lashes. They'd called him Toby Nash. Her Toby was Toby Nash? Toby Nash, known as the most eligible country artist? Unbelievable. No, very believable. The night he'd sung for his family all those years ago played back in her mind, and he'd had a beautiful voice, and now he was at the top of the country charts and a major sex symbol to boot. Not surprising at all. When the women finally left, Toby's eyes met hers. We need to talk. She nodded. Not here, though. Let's walk. Maybe get a bite to eat. Again, she nodded. I don't think you'll need this. He turned her around, untied her apron, and tossed it over the arm of a Queen Anne chair. Oh, wait, she said as she grabbed the apron and pulled her neatly folded wad of money from the pocket and slipped it into the pocket of her skirt. He gripped her elbow and led her out the golden doors. Silently, they meandered down the walk, each trying to sort their thoughts before they put them to words. Caroline spoke first. I thought I'd never see you again. He glanced down at her, suddenly uncomfortable with the pain he was remembering. He drew in a breath. What happened the night I tried to call you? She gave a short laugh. Other than my mother beating me senseless with the phone receiver? It was supposed to be humorous, but it wasn't very funny, and neither one of them cracked a smile. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be crude. Sometimes it's easier to make light of things than to face the truth. He stopped and turned her toward him and searched her face. She smiled to lighten the mood, and he brushed the back of his hand over her cheek. I tried to find you, but I was too late. After I tried to call you that one time, I was afraid to try again, worried it would get you in trouble. I moped around for weeks trying to decide what to do. I promised you I'd never tell anyone your secrets, but I finally broke my promise and spoke to my father. And on his advice, I tried to call you again, but your phone had been disconnected, so I called Uncle James. And when he told me you'd quit your job with them, I was sick with worry. He said you and your mom left the apartments and he couldn't get any information on your whereabouts. Where did you go? What happened? She sighed. So much happened the week after I left you. Her chin quivered as she recalled the hellish time. She told him of the beating she'd taken over the earrings and then the trip to the store to buy her mother a candy bar. And as she told the story, emotions she thought had been dried up began to surface. The feeling of being lost and lonely and vulnerable with no one to protect or take care of her jumped out of some deep hiding place and threatened to consume her. I needed to talk to you so desperately. She stopped and bit her lip to keep the tears from coming, but was unsuccessful. I'm such a crybaby. She laughed through her tears and then stomped her foot in frustration because she couldn't stop them. Toby stood on the chilly New York sidewalk, watching her as she struggled for composure, and his gut wrenched. She wiped her eyes with the back of her knuckles. This is so silly. Everything happened so long ago. I don't know why I'm crying about it now. Toby couldn't fight the need to take care of her, a need he'd kept in check until now. Caroline, come here, princess. He gathered her in his arms and pulled her close. She buried her face against his chest and let go. Feeling his strength, listening to his steady heartbeat, she realized just how much she had missed her one true friend. And now she was safe for the second time in her life. Toby was realizing how desperately he'd wanted to do just what he was doing right now. He'd fantasized about finding her. He'd wanted to rescue her from the hell he knew she must be going through. Wanting to protect her had become an obsession. Later, she had become the object of other obsessions. When still a boy, he'd wished he'd kissed her that last day under the tree, truly kissed her. As he'd grown, those fantasies had become much more than yearning for a kiss. And now, here she was, in the flesh, and it was making his head spin and his heart pump, and those were the only parts of his anatomy he was currently willing to acknowledge. Was it possible to have such strong feelings for someone he barely knew? There had always been a connection right from the start. Is there truly a soulmate for everyone? Is that what she is, his soulmate? Or is he now simply taken by the warmth and charm of a gorgeous blonde? The fact is, she's no longer a skinny little kid. She has all the softness and curves of a woman, and she feels wonderful pressed against him. He stroked her back and squeezed her tighter, letting her spill all the feelings. And when she quieted, he tilted her face up to him and used his thumbs to wipe away the tears. It's not too late, you know. You can tell me now everything you wanted to tell me then, and I'll tell you everything, just like we promised. She smiled up at him. Wouldn't it be nice to sit and talk to him? She'd wondered if he ever saw him. She'd wondered if she ever saw him again, would he seem like a stranger, or would they still feel that bond of friendship? She was happy to discover that the bond was still intact. Even though they'd each gone on to pursue their lives, they were still connected. And now, her Toby was standing in front of her. No, not her Toby. The world's Toby. So, are you really the Toby Nash? He chuckled. Yes, I am. And I can thank you for that. Me? Mm-hmm. You said you had to at least try to do what you loved. Well, I loved to sing, and I decided why not. Besides, with a name like Toby, I had to either take over the farm or become a country singer. There was no in-between. She laughed. And you changed your name to Nash? Stage name stuff, Nash, as in Nashville. My manager's doing. Catchy, huh? She laughed again. Very. I can't believe I've listened to you on the radio hundreds of times and didn't realize it was you. You never saw me, like on a video or something? She shrugged. I don't own a TV or a computer. He spotted a small Italian restaurant and ushered her toward the door. Well, anyway, ever hear my song, 4 Days? It's one of my favorites. It kind of reminds me of the time I spent with you. That's because I wrote it about the time you spent with me. About us. Her eyes filled with tears again. Okay, now, you can't keep doing that. She laughed as she sniffed. I always was a crybaby. He opened the door and guided her through. A heavily tipped host settled them in a corner out of sight of any adoring fans. Toby shook his head in wonder. I can't believe I ran into you. I mean, who would have guessed we'd see each other again in a bar in New York City, of all places? Did you really think about me? She asked. Thought about you, worried about you, prayed for you. I didn't realize until after you left that I would miss you as much as I did. I'm telling you, Caroline, you made quite an impression on me. She smiled. I lived in a few foster homes for a while. At night, I'd lie in bed and pretend you showed up at my door and snuck me out and put me on your horse and rode away. She frowned. I kept hoping you would try to call me again, but if it was several weeks before you tried, I was gone by then. Gone where? I'd tried writing, hoping you'd left a forwarding address, but you never answered my letters. Yeah, I never received them. I doubt there was a forwarding address. He reached across the table and opened his hand, and she slid hers into his, reveling in the warmth and strength. So what happened, Caroline? Uncle Jim said you refused to even talk to them. He paused, hoping she would supply the reason for that. She didn't. Only her eyes told of the sadness she felt. It's crazy, she uttered softly. All these terrible things happened. Once I got back from Tennessee, it was like my mother just went crazy. There were several episodes which I would rather not talk about, but anyway, the defining moment was in February when I passed out at school. I was taken to a hospital, examined, and along with all the bruises, they found I had a concussion from the most recent thing with my mother. You can say it, Caroline. I know. Remember? I figured you out. The most recent beating. That's what you meant. She looked down. She was just so lonely, so mixed up. Toby frowned and almost growled. Don't defend her to me, Caroline. She looked at him, her brown eyes blinking slowly. I just want you to understand. I do understand. Your father left her. She was bitter, and she started drinking. Yes, and sometimes when someone's drinking, they're not responsible for what they do or say. He sighed. I do understand, but don't defend her. She was sad and lonely and bitter with good reason. Still, she knew she had a child to take care of, and still she drank, and then took all her bitterness out on her little girl, who is the sweetest, kindest person I've ever known. He paused and tamped down his anger. So, what happened at the hospital? Well, child services was called in, and they put me in a foster home for several weeks while my mom went through treatment for drinking. We lost the apartment. My mother was finally released and took a room in an old motel. I was allowed to live with her again under supervision. I hated it, but I tried to get on with my life. She drew a deep breath, her head shaking slowly. It took me a long time before I was able to get up enough courage to try to contact the Stillwaters. When I did, I found they no longer lived in the apartments, and I had no idea how to track them down. I suppose they finally had enough money for the down payment on their home. It all happened so fast. I was going to ask them how I could contact you, maybe call from their house, but I was too late. You must have gone through hell, he said, his voice gruff. Maybe, but I think it made me strong. Or maybe it did. What I don't understand, though, is why you needed courage to contact the Stillwaters. They thought the world of you. She shook her head. No, you don't understand. They wouldn't think the world of me if they'd known what I did. He leaned forward. What did you do? She looked up, startled that she'd even said that much. It's not important. It must have been pretty important to keep you away from those kids. I know you loved them. She shook her head. Princess, what did you do that was so terrible? I can't even imagine. Maybe it's not as bad as you think. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The horror of that day replayed in her mind as it had many times through the years. Over and over she could see her hands swinging and striking little Paul's sweet face. She shuddered. How she hated herself for that. She'd never told anyone what she'd done, and that's how it would remain. She couldn't bear for anyone to know what a monster she was. She drew a deep breath. I can't tell you. But we're friends, Caroline. Remember, you can tell me anything. I can't, she whispered. I don't want to talk about me anymore. Please. Okay. It bugged him that she refused to confide in him. Sighing, he changed the subject and talked about his career, his parents, his brother and sister. He asked her about her career, but to his frustration, she avoided that subject too. What could he expect after so long? She'd lost trust in him. Still, that didn't keep them from holding hands and thoroughly enjoying each other's company. Let's give these guys a break, Toby finally said as he realized that they were the last diners. He erased any misgivings the waitstaff may have had for having to stay late with the size of the tip, and he had them nodding and smiling and inviting them back any time. Back out on the street, it was cool, and Toby slipped his arm around Caroline to keep her warm. So the music awards are tomorrow, she asked. Or I guess today, since it's so late. Yep. And then? Well, actually, I'm going to be in town for a while. We're doing a recording session with Crazy 88. It's a country rock crossover kind of thing. Wow, Crazy 88, that's pretty impressive. I have a friend who's gaga over their bass player. She smiled up at him. I'm proud of you, Toby. You made it. You're a huge success. He stopped and grabbed her shoulders, excitement in his eyes. Caroline, come to the awards. Really? Yes, come with me. It'll be great fun, he said, a huge grin on his face. With you? Her answer lacked the enthusiasm he'd hoped for. Yes? Who else? Well, I just mean, well, don't you do that red carpet thing? Yeah, so? She shook her head. No way am I going to parade with you on camera in front of the world so some cheeky thing can add me to their worst dressed list. Oh, it won't be like that. They don't pay much attention to the country singers, not the male ones anyway. Who are you kidding? No, I can't do that. I'm sorry. He sighed. She was still such a closed person, private. He was baffled by the fact that she still seemed to have secrets that she wouldn't share with him. Pushing his frustration aside, he drew a deep breath. They'd been apart a long time, and maybe she didn't feel the connection as strongly as he did, or maybe she just needed time. How about this? How about you attend just as one of the crowd? He watched as she wrinkled up her cute little nose. Her eyes met his, and he smiled. That might be okay, she finally said. Pulling 2 tickets from his wallet, he placed them in her hand. You can bring a friend. This is prime seating, too. She shoved them down into her skirt pocket and, out of habit, rummaged in the other pocket to make sure her money was still there. He watched her. He'd been having a hard time keeping his eyes off her all night. Her mouth reminded him of rose petals, pink and soft. Her upper lip was drawn up like a bow, and her bottom lip full and luscious. Remembering some of his fantasies, he found he wanted to taste those lips desperately. Her brown eyes were soft and expressive, her blonde hair smooth and shiny, and that body. She had the most gorgeous legs he'd ever seen. Her calf muscles were ripped, the rest of her so tight. He shook his head. Lord have mercy, he mumbled. What? She asked. Oh, nothing. I just can't believe you're standing right here in front of me after searching for you for so long. It's a miracle, isn't it? He didn't answer her. His eyes were suddenly dark and dangerous. Is something wrong? Caroline asked. I'm sorry, Caroline, but I've been wanting to do this for 15 years, and I find I can't wait another second. Slowly, he pulled her around to face him. Placing a finger under her chin, he tilted her face up and lowered his mouth to hers. His lips brushed over her softly, giving her time to get used to the idea. It didn't take long. Caroline leaned toward him and melted into him. She purred when he deepened the kiss. She tasted every bit as sweet as he'd imagined. He groaned softly with the sweet agony, his hands sliding through her hair. She sighed. That small sound aroused him beyond anything he'd experienced, and cautiously he broke the kiss and stepped back, breathless. He felt as if he'd been punched in the gut, and he was realizing one very obvious thing. One kiss was not going to be enough. Caroline stood swaying, breathless and dazed. Toby had kissed her, just like she'd imagined all those nights when she lay wondering about him and dreaming of him. Once she tried to push all those desires away, to stop the pain, and now they came rushing back like a freight train. The heat pooled in her stomach and spread out in every direction, making her feel alive for the first time. Oh, my, she finally uttered. He smiled at her reaction. Oh, my, indeed. His hand reached out to cup her face, and he moved the pad of his thumb over her mouth, shivered, stepped away. I'd better get you back. They arrived back at the hotel, surprised to find it to be almost 3 o'clock in the morning. Hey, before I forget, let me get your cell number. She shook her head. I don't have a cell phone. You're kidding. Everyone has a cell phone. She laughed. Not everyone. I can't afford it. He sighed. Okay. Well, anyway, where do you live, Caroline? I'll get a taxi and see you home. No, she answered quickly. It's not far, and I have friends who are around here somewhere. They're probably worried about me. I need to find them. She put her hand to her cheek. Oh, my gosh. I just realized I took off without saying anything to Maurice. Why did those words provoke such sudden anger? Maurice? The bartender, my boss. Oh. Feeling calmer, he shrugged. Well, he probably thinks you quit so you wouldn't have to pay for the glasses you broke, Toby joked. He realized, to hide the fact, that he'd been suddenly very worried if she had a boyfriend. Does she? He wondered. She winced. I need to find him. Well, the lounge is closed. It'll be okay. You can call him tomorrow. She sighed. I hope he's not too upset with me. I'm sure he'll understand. Now, where are those friends of yours? Or just tell me where you live so I can get you home. He smiled and touched her nose. Caroline backed away. She didn't want him to see the crummy little apartment she lived in. She didn't want him to know that she hadn't accomplished her dreams like he had. She felt ashamed of her life. He had become a big star, and she was a lowly waitress in a diner. She looked up at him and gave a short laugh. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. I'll see you at the awards tonight. He frowned. Just like when she was 12, she still had secrets, and it was making him feel frustrated and irritable. He wanted to shake her and make her open up. He wanted to say, I'm here now, Caroline. It's me, remember? You can tell me anything. The annoyance of her refusal to let him in was really getting to him. No. Maybe he was irritable because it was so late, or maybe it was because he wanted her so much. He'd never felt such a surge of mixed-up emotions. He pressed his lips together as an uncomfortable, angry feeling simmered just underneath the surface. Anger? Is that what he was feeling? Is he angry? Or is the shock of seeing her again putting his emotions in turmoil? Glancing around, he ran a hand through his hair. Look, I can't just leave you here in a hotel lobby at 3 a.m. I need to see you home. She smiled. I understand the Southern gentleman kind of thing, but I'm a big girl now, Toby, and I can take care of myself. Now, why did that statement bother him? Of course, she can take care of herself. She's a grown woman, isn't she? And she's been taking care of herself for a very long time. What is she trying to say? That she doesn't need him anymore? She took his hand. Are you staying here at the hotel? He nodded his head. Come on, Toby. I'll walk you around to the elevator. Reluctantly, he walked beside her, and when they arrived at the elevator doors, they stood silently, awkwardly. His hand tightened on hers. Man, I'm having a hard time saying goodbye. Me too. He leaned against the wall and pulled her close to him. Let me take you home, he whispered. No, she whispered back. The frustration mounted. He fought it down. He ran his hands up and down her arms and snaked one arm around her waist, bringing her body flush with his. She raised her face to him, anticipating. He kissed her softly. Lord, she was so sweet. So sweet. Slowly her arms rose to circle his neck. His lips left hers for a moment to taste her just below her ear, and she whimpered. More. He had to have more. His hand slid down her upraised arms to her waist, and she swooned, and he held her tighter, and he wanted her more than he'd wanted anything in his life. His Caroline was here, in his arms, pressed against him. It was heaven and hell at the same time. In an awareness somewhere in the back of their minds, they heard the elevator chime, and they knew someone stepped out into the corridor. Well, 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 Rosie declared loudly, obviously having had a little too much to drink. I see you finally got you one, little Miss Caro, she said, slurring her words badly. Now, you need to take that wee laddie upstairs and make sure you get paid first, dearest. Oh, and if I were you, I'd charge extra for all that kissing. Rosie sauntered off. Caroline stepped back from Toby with a smile to give an explanation of Rosie's words. It was almost funny. She started to make a joke about him being her John until she looked up to see the expression on his face. She'd never seen him like this before. His blue eyes appeared almost black, his countenance thunderous. Is he actually angry? Caroline, you're turning tricks? Once again she opened her mouth to speak, to deny, but hesitated. So completely floored by the extent of his anger, she could only stand there, her mouth open like a codfish. Hands on his hips, he talked between clenched teeth. So, I guess that's why you didn't want me to take you home. You're not finished working for the night? The fact that he could be so angry so quickly was fueling her temper. She clamped her lips shut to keep from saying something ugly, like telling him what a donkey he was being. Don't you have anything to say for yourself? He bellowed. You have no idea what you're talking about, she answered sharply, finally finding her voice. Oh, I know all right, he came right back. I know that you let strange men touch you in ways that... He couldn't even say it. He felt sick. Are you sure you know it? Are you denying it? She could, but would be darned if she would give him the pleasure. Crossing her arms over her chest, she glared at him. So, when were you going to tell me? He interrogated. What business is it of yours anyway? So what if I am turning tricks? It's not like you've been in my life. Who are you to judge? How much were you going to charge me? Or were you going to give me a freebie for old time's sake? And now it was beginning to hurt. How could he say such things? How much? Her eyes appealed to him to stop, to reconsider what he was saying. How much, Caro? I mean, what's the going rate now? He charged on. I'm guessing you must be working the musicians in town for the awards. Do you get more for the ones up for the really big awards? Heck, I'm up for Country Album of the Year. I guess that would really cost me, huh? She could feel the sobs working their way up from her chest to her throat, and she forced them down again. He yanked out his wallet. This should about cover it. Pulling out every bill he had, which was a few $1,000s, he grabbed her by the pocket on the front of her blouse and shoved them in. Caroline stumbled away, incredulous. You horrible. She stopped herself. She turned and ran blindly toward the hotel door. She crashed right into one man and fell to the floor. Rising quickly, he began apologizing and made a big show of helping her up and brushing her off, but she didn't stay to hear his apologies. She had to get out of there. Toby stood by the elevator, getting his bearings and trying to fathom what had just taken place. What had just happened? What had he done? More importantly, what had she done? How could she throw her life away like that? How could she give herself to... He couldn't even finish the thought. Still, he'd hurt her. He had never wanted to hurt her, and now he had. Those big brown eyes looking up at him. He shook his head, started after her, but stopped himself. He needed to calm down first. He needed to think. Sighing with exasperation, he ran a hand through his hair and slammed the button on the elevator. The door opened immediately, and he stepped inside. Once out on the street, Caroline heard Rosie calling to her. She stopped and turned, her hands on her hips, watching her friend approach. Caroline wanted to scream at her, but darn it, Rosie was in tears. Carol couldn't bring herself to heap misery on top of misery. I heard everything, wee Carol. I'm so sorry. I messed you up big time, didn't I? Let me make it up to you. I have a whale of a big mouth, and it's always getting me into trouble, especially when I've had a wee bit too much to drink. Please, Carol, I'm so sorry, honey. Say something. I don't know what to say. She shook her head violently, allowing the tears their escape. Oh, Rosie, how could he say those things to me? The anger came back quickly, though. She pulled the money from her blouse. Here, you can do something to make it up to me. She placed the money in Rosie's hand. His name is Toby Nash. Find out which room he's in and take this back to him and tell him, oh, never mind. I don't know what to tell him. And that is the end of chapter 3.